Taxation, as a matter of fact, was not alien to the various ethnic nationalities in Nigeria before the advent of the colonial masters. The different groups had various ways of raising funds for their developmental needs. The Yorubas in the southwest had Owori and Isakole. Among the Igbos in the southeast existed Ibunku or Iwunku. The north had a more stable and organized tax system based on the Islamic religion. There were the Zakat, Jangali, and Shuka types of taxation. But the introduction of income tax by Lord Frederick Lugard in northern Nigeria in 1904 changed all that. And to give the new income tax regime a legal backing, he further promulgated the Native Ordinance of 1917. However, the introduction of taxation in southern Nigeria was not without some hitches. From a historical perspective, the first recorded resistance to taxation took place in Egba land in 1914 and 1918 respectively, as a result of the Egba United Government's attempt to impose tax on the people. The Ijema people of Egba land rejected the tax policy, and the attempt by government to enforce the new tax regime led to a bloodbath known in history as the Ijema Massacre, where about 500 people lost their lives. Spurred on by the success of the 1917 Revenue Ordinance in the north, in 1918, an amended ordinance which extended the provisions of the 1917 ordinance to southern Nigeria was enacted. The major feature of the 1918 ordinance was the imposition of tax on all taxable adults and individuals resident in the colony of Lagos, Badagry, Ekpe, and Ikorodu townships. In 1927, the Tax Colony Ordinance of 1927, which imposed tax on all natives and non-native adults, was imposed. Also, a poll tax assessment of 2.5% of annual incomes was imposed on the western provinces that were not originally captured in the tax net. As a result, the Kwale and Warri people in the Delta, then part of western Nigeria, protested against the policy. In 1928, the Tax Ordinance of 1927 was extended to eastern Nigeria. Perhaps the most celebrated and the most violent of all the tax reports known in history as the Aba Women Riot in 1929 started in a remote village called Oloko in the present-day Ikwana Umuahia local government area, Abia State.
Warranty for Kugo started his ruling in the year 1874. He ruled from 1874 to 1930. He ruled 44 years. In the year 1928 and 29, the British government called a meeting. He fell, but then he was indisposed. He couldn't attend the meeting. He could only send his one of his followers, said, go and attend that meeting. He went. The British officer said that there be a sort of census, that he should go and count the people in his community so that we may know exactly the number of people that they are ruling. He sent one Mr. Mark Emerowa. Mark went to a place in this Oloko, Obabas, at the compound of Wanyowa. And that women were beating town fruit. He went there, said that he was sent to come and count you people. The woman, that Wanyowa, pounced on him with that oil and raised alarm. So many people came almost from Aba, and that is why it was called Aba riot. It wasn't Aba riot, it was a local riot.
In 1935, Mr. Frank G. Lloyd was appointed the Deputy Commissioner of Income Tax for Inland Revenue in Nigeria. He served until 1943. In 1939, the Company Income Tax Ordinance Number 4 was enacted. This was the law that introduced the word person to the tax legislation for the first time, and the word person was defined to include companies. Companies were also taxed under this ordinance in 1939 for the first time. In 1914, the earlier Native Revenue Ordinance 1917, 1918, 1927, 1928, and 1939 was incorporated into the Direct Tax Ordinance, which repealed the Native Revenue Ordinance, Cap 74. The 1940s also witnessed another tax resistance in Egba land, this time by the women. The Egba women, under the leadership of Mrs. Fumilayo Ransom Kuti, rose up in arms against the Alake of Egba land for his decision to impose tax on women.
Mrs. Kuti was the leader of the women group in Abeokuta. He was a member of the NCNC at that time. And being a politician, you know, his activities will be so pronounced. And even he contested election, but could not go in. Later, he gathered some market women together to fight the issue when the issue of taxation was raised, that women should start to pay tax. So they started the riot. They marched from his own house to Ake here, and most of them slept in front of the palace at that time. But when the situation was unbearable, then the Ogoni chiefs and all others decided that Alake should leave the city for the women at that time. And that was in 1947.
The year 1940 was a significant year in the economic history of Nigeria, because there was boom in economic activities, especially in the areas of trade and commerce. The Colonial Office, in response to this development, appointed and commissioned Mr. J.C. Mundy, an experienced tax administrator, to draft the reversed tax legislation based on the tax model ordinance supplied by the Colonial Office, London. The then Governor of Nigeria, Sir Arthur Richards, later Lord Milverton, appointed a committee of Legislative Council to deliberate on the Mundy Income Tax Report. The approval of the Mundy Income by the Committee of Legislation Council paved the way for the eventual birth of the Inland Revenue Service. As a follow-up, Mr. Walter B. Dare was appointed the first Commissioner of Income Tax for West Africa. He was assisted in the colonies by Deputy Commissioners, and here in Nigeria, Frank B. Lloyd became the Deputy Commissioner of Income Tax. He served until 1943. Mr. W.A.B. Carter of the United Kingdom Inland Revenue was posted to Nigeria as the first Commissioner of Income Tax. The first income tax year in Nigeria was April 1, 1943 to March 31, 1944. In 1957, the federal government set up the Raceman Fiscal Commission, headed by Sir Jeremy Raceman, with Professor R.C. Tress as member. This two-man committee was to review the Arthur Richards Committee of Legislative Council report. They submitted their report in 1958. With the discovery of oil in Oloibiri in 1956 came the Petroleum Ordinance Number 15 of 1958 that brought the petroleum sector into the tax net for the first time. At independence, there was the need to indigenize the Nigerian tax system. The board was reconstituted and the Federal Board of Inland Revenue was statutorily established under Section 4 of the Companies Income Tax Act No. 22 of 1961. Mr. Ephraim Obed Oshindero was the first indigenous chairman of the board. He served from 1961 to 1971. His contributions to the revenue yield of the department and the economic transformation of Nigeria were phenomenal.
Now, Chief E.O. Oshindero was a very, very special kind of gentleman. Very disciplined, strict. In his own administration, he got his vote for public relations, you know, the money they gave him for to run their office, coffee, tea, and all that. Okay. Chief Oshindero never used his vote from beginning of the year to the end of it. At the end of the year, he retired it. His entertainment allowance for his staff. I didn't give it out. Now, that was the type of man he was.